Hi everybody, welcome to a new Rebalance activity. Rebalance, as you may know, is a research project, a European research project that is investigating future mobility values and culture. Today we will talk about the hopes and the needs of the future with Andrea, Ricci, and Daniel Rodriguez Cassolà, both experts on Foresight from ISINNOVA. As you may know, Andrea has a very long experience dealing with European and global foresight. The setting that we designed is as follows. First, Andrea will introduce us the main findings on the projects in relation to trends. Then we may have a conversation with all of you. Later on, we will have Andrea as well presenting us future scenarios and alternative narratives. Again, we imagine to have together with you a discussion afterwards. And the last presentation will be by Daniel, that will introduce us the findings that we have in relation to the vision in relation to mobility in Europe, taking into account the core values we have in relation to just I have to remind you just to please keep your camera off and mute your micro during the presentations, so we can have a more clear understanding of what first Andrea will tell us. So Andrea, the floor is yours. You can begin right now.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Welcome everybody. So yes, I will briefly introduce the project because I'm sure that most of you already are familiar with it, but just as a reminder, this is the basic skeleton, the process that we've been following in the project in three main steps. The first one, it was looking at the so-called language of the present, which means analyzing the current mobility culture and trying to understand what are the drivers behind it. The second one is a more imaginative part, and this is the one on which we will concentrate today, the needs and hopes of the future, which is the step which should lead us and has led us to the drafting of a possible vision for the future mobility culture at Horizon 2050. Or earlier if possible. And then there is a third stage, which is about recommendations and how to translate this vision into policy inputs. And this will be discussed on the third event next Thursday. Politics and Poetry is the nice title that we found for it. And the concrete substance of this is trying to elaborate a strategy to implement the vision, to translate it into practice. Ultimately, there will be, let's say, a final moment of the whole exercise, which will concentrate on the drafting of and the presentation and discussion of a manifesto for a new mobility culture. And this will be at the focus of our final conference on November 22nd, which will be held as a hybrid event in Brussels and online. So in other words, this is a little bit what this means in terms of the ambition of the project. So understanding, then developing a vision through imagination, then recommending. And clearly, I think it's important to understand that one of the aims of this project was to set up a network and a platform for discussion of mobility culture related issues, which hopefully should be maintained and should be kept alive after the end of the project, especially for us to be able to monitor the extent to which we have been able to come up with inputs and suggestions that are or can be taken up by policymakers at both the European and the national member state level. So having said that, we're talking today about the central part of the project, which is about foresight. Foresight is I mean, Rebalance has been defined actually as a foresight project. So we have been following a path which is fairly well known to those who are familiar with the foresight techniques, which is schematized in this slide. So starting from the scanning of the horizon through literature, media reviews, etc., in order to identify trends and weak signals that characterize the dynamics of the mobility and mobility culture. These, given the emphasis of our project on cultural aspects, would then have to be interpreted in terms of their relevance for culture and value based issues, and therefore identifying specific culture and value related drivers that are likely to influence the dynamics of mobility culture. And following that, we have used all this evidence and these insights to proceed to the identification of scenarios, which I will describe in a minute when we come to that. And finally, clearly, all this converges to the identification, the definition, and the shaping of a vision. So today, we will start by looking, we will follow this pathway, trying to give you the gist of what we have found along this process, starting, of course, with the horizon scanning and trends and weak signals, which, like I said, was a fairly intense exercise based on the review of evidence mining from literature, from media, both past and present, social media and popular literature as well, to guide us into this process and to make sure that we are not missing out important factors. So we have adopted a framework which is fairly well known, which is called the PESTEL framework in foresight jargon terms, which basically subdivides trends and drivers into these 6 categories, those which are of a political nature, those related to the economy, to the dynamics of society and culture, technology, of course, legal and regulatory matters, and environmental issues. So this is more like a framework which has the advantage of allowing us to ensure to the extent possible that we are not missing out important things. And this we have done by looking at several hundred of sources, which you can find documented in the project deliverables, of course, and which has led us to a first screening, a first trimming down of the huge amount of information that was found from an initial list which comprised something like 200 trends and drivers. We have come down to a shorter list of some 30 trends, which is the one on which we have really then concentrated and worked. And we have regrouped these 30 trends and drivers into 6 categories. You see the first 3 here: lifestyles, changes and dynamics, so things like urban exodus, the growing tendency of so-called polytopic living, of course, the rise in flexible remote work, the changing patterns of using time for business and leisure, and the role of status symbol in that. Of course, shopping patterns, which are also in continuous evolution, and the increased awareness of environmental impact of transport as a factor which influences decisions of customers. Of course, some of these observed trends and signals are already to some extent consolidated. Others are only emerging, and not all of them are here to stay. Maybe some of those, for instance, which are the result of the recent traumas of our society, like typically the pandemics, are something which is very clearly observable. But there is a big question mark about the extent to which they will be continuing in the future. Then travel habits, reductions in daily mobility, the fact that while business travel appears to have a more virtuous trend to some extent, but this is also arguable towards decarbonization, leisure travel seems to be remaining carbon intensive, although, and also because after the pandemic again, it is booming again. Then we move to modal choices. Of course, we all witness the emergence of two-wheelers, both motorized and non, but also the use of public transportation, which is subject to quite difficult interpretation, because it is currently has been seen a decline due to the pandemics and the fact that people are afraid of closed spaces. But again, is this something that is here to stay or not? For sure, the rollers car is changing. In which direction? Here again, we have contradictory signals, which it would be interesting to clarify. And maybe, hopefully, night trains that make a comeback across Europe. We have signals of that as well. And the second set of these 30 factors, of course, technology. Technology is always important, but again, the important thing is to interpret how this technology is being used. So, of course, there are new mobility services. We know about electrification, you know about the Internet of Things and vehicle-to-X communication. The growing environmental concern, whether spontaneous or forced, on airline companies, which is something which is being increasingly talked about, and generating a technological innovation. Ban of domestic flights towards autonomous train systems as well, and possibly new generation of the so-called high-speed train with maglev or hyperloops. Big question mark again. The city vision, well, mobility, of course, is not only urban, but we all know that for obvious reasons, the urban dimension of mobility is extremely important and critical. And this has to do not only with the organization of transport, but also with the organization of, for instance, urban space, which is being reclaimed for pedestrian and other soft activities, and not only for transport. These also questions something which has been a kind of a dogma for a long time, considering that the city density was a major ingredient to ensure city efficiency, and apparently this is something which is now being questioned. It's interesting to reflect on where we will go. Involvement of citizens, particularly in urban design. And also the role of I think it has not escaped to most of us that future visions of cities are often dystopian. So whether this reflects an observation and a trend, or whether this is something which can be reversed, is also very interesting. Finally, the social interaction dimension, with the widening inequality gap and the need, the call for more mobility justice and transport justice. Like I mentioned before, the fear of crowded places, is it going to be continued or not? And a major concern, an increasing concern on safety and security threats. Finally, last but not least, we'll come back to that when we look at the scenarios. Another mantra, apart from the density one, which is increasingly being questioned, is the mantra about speed. Is speed the main objective and aim, or at least the dimension which is has appeared and still appears to be more appealing when making transport choices? That's also a question which is open. So as you can see, a number of trends which are on one hand certainly observed and supported by evidence, on the other hand subject to lots of uncertainty in terms of where these is going in the future. And this is the reason why a foresight exercise is particularly interesting in this case, because foresight makes sense only when we are aware of the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty and that there is room and open possibilities to influence the future by acting on one or the other or more of the trends and drivers that we have evidence upon. So based on this first already shorter list of trends and signals, we have then tried to look into the extent to which each of these or many of these trends and drivers should be considered really relevant when we look at the cultural and value-related dimension of drivers, because this is the focus of our project. So to try to enrich on one hand, but simplify on the other, this long list of 30 factors, we have relied also on a series of very challenging and interesting conversation with experts and stakeholders, for which we chose some kind of, controversial themes and provocative themes. Automation is a total reliance on automation, a real experience of freedom, which is what we're being sold in many cases. Digitalization, this is also something which is clearly not only on the cards, but already happening, but are we all ready to go digital? Greener transport choices, lots of talk about this. Greta Thunberg would say probably it's blah, blah, blah. I don't know if it's blah, blah, but certainly it's important to try and understand to what extent this apparent increasing concern and awareness about environmental and health is really playing a role in fostering notably modal shifts. And the future role of the car, as I said, is it still true that owning a car is what makes us feel that we can really do what we want, go anywhere and do just about anything, the freedom concept? And finally, clearly the dynamics of living, working and shopping patterns, which is associated to mobility patterns, which real values and factors are actually shaping the changes. Again, a controversy between, is this driven primarily by a green and environmental concern or by efficiency concerns or by other concerns like increasing comfort and convenience. So these conversations helped us trying to interpret the initial list of drivers in terms of their relevance to look into specifically culture and value related aspects. And this has led us to a shorter list of 12 main drivers, which are summarized in this table. So the dynamics of the living environment, the basic principles behind the way people make important decisions in their life, what actually steers people's life, the role of empowerment and the ambition to participate. Techno-scientific society, so that the reliance and to some extent the trust and unconditioned trust into scientific progress. An interesting concept which has been debated for a long time, but has for also a long time been perceived as kind of a taboo. Can we actually make a difference between useful mobility and non-essential mobility? Then the equity problem and the equity issue. Inequalities are increasing across the board. This also affects transport and mobility. Transport, we talk a lot about energy poverty, but there is also an issue about mobility poverty. The livability of urban contexts. Like we mentioned before, the concerns about, on the one hand, safety, on the other one, privacy. The very foundation of our mobility culture as something which is traditionally, historically related to car. If you look at, information, advertisements, discussions, most of it is still related to the car. The ambition and the options allowed for achieving this ambition of the citizens to actually participate more, so participation, and clearly the overall dominant theme of sustainability transition. So these were the 12 drivers, which by, screening down this huge amount of information about trends and signals, we have come up with these 12 lists. So what was the next step? The next step was to use these drivers to build scenarios. And to do this, we have to go through the identification of what are usually called critical uncertainties. What are critical uncertainties? Well, first of all, it's important that we understand if these 12 key drivers actually have a range of variation which is sufficiently wide and contrasted to materialize a true alternative. If the future is already somehow predetermined on the cards and the range of variation is limited, then they're not very interesting to debate because they are somehow already on the cards. And therefore, what we actually do when we look at critical uncertainties is we try to rank each of the drivers according to two main criteria. And we've done that through a dedicated internal service. The first criteria being the relevance. So to what extent the value then, the positioning of the driver in this range of variation between the two extremes is actually likely to affect the shaping future mobility. If it moves from one end to the other, does mobility, culture and mobility really are affected by this or not? And the second, and even possibly more important, is the uncertainty, because like I said, if a driver is already, its future dynamics are already well known, then of course, on one hand, it doesn't help in building alternative visions of the future. On the other hand, it means that there is little room for policy to actually do something about it. So based on these, on the combination of these two main criteria, we have come up with a list of 7. And this is the last one, I promise. We have no less than that. 7 critical uncertainties, which are summarized here, together with the extreme values that they can adopt depending on what the future looks like. So the purpose of life, life steering purpose, we mentioned it earlier. On one hand, on the one extreme, we have wealth, basically, and success as it can be judged through economic achievements. On the other hand, we have the concept which is still probably in need of a more precise definition, which is well-being and quality of life. Then equity and inequalities. Again, we have at one extreme a society based primarily on individualism, on the other one which relies and believes in the fact that we can make the world a better place to be if we rely on solidarity and collective accountability. Empowerment, at one extreme, competition for individual power. I think we all know about it. As opposed to cooperation for collective empowerment. The role of technology and then what we do with technologies in terms of techno-scientific advancement. At one end, we have the mantra of efficiency. Technology is here to help us make a more efficient use of a certain number of resources. And we do things simply often because technology allows them to do this. On the other hand, we have societal progress as the lighthouse and the real polar star that drives our choices. Environmental sustainability. On one hand, we have a very traditional and to some extent, although recent in historical terms. Sorry, that was not what I wanted to do. Okay, which is about controlling and protecting the environment. Increasingly, we tend to question this by opposing to this attitude, an attitude which is now increasingly characterized as the stewardship of environment, of caring about the environment, not only protecting it for our interest, but caring it because it is a value per se. Urban landscape, again, driven by resource efficiency. So again, the density mantra I mentioned before, as opposed to livability. And finally, accessibility, which can be related and associated through very deeply rooted beliefs to the ownership. When you own a car, you know that you can go anywhere, as opposed to the concept of using whatever instruments and systems are available to develop an experience. So this is what we came up with in terms of critical uncertainties. And maybe I can make a small break here, because the next step will be about how we have used all this evidence and this elaboration of drivers, trends, weak signals, critical uncertainties to develop scenarios. But I don't know, Andreu, maybe you would want to intervene here and ask some specific questions about this first part.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for your comprehensive presentation, Andrea. I have plenty of questions, as you may know. May I ask you only one question, and maybe other people can jump in briefly, because we have a schedule to follow. But my question will be in relation to empowerment and life purpose, which are two concepts you mentioned. Do you think that there is a trend towards transport technology and communication giving more chances to people freedom, or is restraining? There is the risk that is going to restrain our capacity to choose when and how we move. So I'm actually asking you about the risk of alienation, meaning that we are not using transport technology or transport modes of transport, but it's the technology that is using us. Let's say when you think on millions of people which are using the same public transport to use at 7 o'clock to go to work and come back, when you see all traffic jams, the illusion of freedom that gives the car when there is no room for cars. Driving is only, you know, in the advertisement or in the weekends experience that is good to live. So do you think that transport and new technologies are going to give us more chances for freedom or for alienation?
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, that's a big question, and one which is incidentally not only related to transport choices, because technology and the role of technology typically is crucial to understand how, depending how we interpret it and what we want to do with it. I think that's until and unless we spread around, I mean, that's my wish at least, to spread around the notion that technology is a means and not an end, and that it is an instrument, until and unless we somehow manage to raise this basic perception of the role of technology, there is unfortunately a high chance that we will be driven by technology rather than the other way around. Look at what happens in, for instance, with mobile phones or anything else. And this is clearly something which, and that's why this project, I hope, is important, and I hope I will be able to convey some messages, because it really means that we have to go deep down into the foundations of our rooted beliefs, or maybe we're not even aware that we have these beliefs, because they are so deeply rooted that we take them for granted without thinking about them. So the culture, education, awareness, engagement, participation are the only way that can lead us to many directions, but in particular, to answer your question, towards an understanding of technology as an instrument. We should be maybe even decide which technologies need to be pushed and which we don't need to be pushing. Why? Because we have ultimate objectives, we have ultimate values that do not require specific technological devices.
Thank you, Andrea. This is linked to the life purpose, critical uncertainty that you listed in the first position, of course. This is at the core of our project. So maybe I can ask people participating in our webinar to send questions and comments in the chat, and I may invite you later on to participate. And may you, Andrea, continue now with the second presentation.
Okay. Yes, like I said, we come to the point where we have the evidence, at least, to try and devise alternative scenarios, which was one of the objectives that were set out in our initial mandate. And to do this, we have to, first of all, decide how we want to actually frame and structure these scenarios. And all the evidence gathered so far and the elaboration of the various drivers had led us to this fairly simple scheme as the basic structure for to support our scenarios, with a classical 2x2 scenario description with two axes, the horizontal axis being an axis reflecting governance styles, if you wish, power and politics, we've called them, but it means basically which type of governance are we going to have. On the left hand, we have so-called hard governance, so top-down, command and control, hierarchical, authority-based type of governance at one extreme. On the other extreme, we have so-called soft power and soft governance, which is based on things like moral suasion, like nudging, and like, again, softer approaches to bring people to abide by rules. Of course, we need rules and we need laws even in a soft power scheme, but the way in which they are promoted and enforced and the means and the tools of governance are different. On the vertical axis, we have put the type of society, where on the top we have a fairly rigid society, which is not prone to and not open and not easily open to major changes, to questioning rooted systems and organization and beliefs, and as a consequence becomes rigid also in terms of their actual life, their physical movement. At the other end, we have a more fluid society, which reflects in social values at large, but in particular in terms of the level to which people are ready to be flexible and to accommodate dynamics of change, whether or not they have been instrumental to determining them. So based on this overall frame, we came up with these four scenarios, which we decided to title with myths, well, fairly well-known myths. So at the top left side, a combination between hard powers and a rigid society. We called it the myth of Hercules, the myth of strength. Going to clockwise on the right top side, a combination of a society which is still rigid but is mainly governed through more soft instruments. We have the myth of justice and Themis. Bottom left, society is fluid and soft, maximum flexibility, adaptability, awareness, openness, but of course this means a very intense and let's say concrete network of interconnection, so the myth of Gaia. And finally, on the bottom left, the myth of speed, with Hermes representing this vision. And we tried, of course, to, we have gone to much more extensive and detailed narrative than the few buzzwords that you can find here. But this may give you an idea of what each of these scenarios means in terms of the 6 dimensions of the pestle framework. So in terms of politics, for instance, for Hercules, clearly we have a state, powers, lobbies, and authoritative means. Economy is driven by the objective of accumulating wealth, and as a consequence, it's primarily in the hands of big companies who have the critical mass to do so. Society is conservative, but rather homogeneous. Technology is very important, but is again mainly used to pursue efficiency and to some extent with the variance, which we've called second nature here with the advent of biotechnology. And the law is clearly we call it the empire of law. The basic governance approach here relies precisely on laws and regulation. Environment is not absent. Of course, there is concern about the environment, but the main goal is to protect it, period. Why? Because we consider that it is something which provides service to humanity. It's not for as an end per se, but because it is instrumental to our lives. Clockwise, the theme is the politics. We're still in a rigid society, but this time with rather softer governance. So emphasizing the role of alliances, international cooperation. Growth, of course, is still important, and we are still in a market-oriented economy. The society is still, again, somehow conservative, but with a more liberal approach and a higher level of toleration from minorities. Technology is here again primarily seen as a tool for efficiency, but with somehow a rather more open approach to its sharing and sharing the benefits of technology across society. And from the legal part, there is a major change here because we rely here more on tools like moral suasion and corporate governance. Environment, we go a little bit beyond protection here, and we understand the need to not only protect what is there, but also to recover, to make somehow progress towards recovery. Gaia is a combination of a fluid society with the soft powers. Clearly, this is the maximum level of flexibility and the destructuring, if you wish, shared distributed power with citizen participation. Inequalities are at the center of economic strategy, so redistribution is the key word here, with possible tools such as cooperative management. Society is definitely progressive and embraces its heterogeneity without claiming to flatten it down. Technology, major change here is clearly and deliberately socially oriented, and it's somehow in the background because, like we said, it's an instrument, so it is in the background. And from the legal point of view, again, there are laws, there are regulations, they are important, but they more rely on tools like social marketing and the environmental governance. Environment here is considered as a common good which need to be integrated in our everyday life. Finally, the myth of speed. We go back to a hard society, but with the hard governance, but with a society which has undergone a fluidification process. So from the political point of view, there are quite a number of innovations in terms of the citizens' participation, citizen consultation. It is obviously still a democracy and a liberal one. Economy, again, is more flexible than above, with the cyclic adjustment and collaboration when needed between the various actors. Society is progressive liberal or liberal progressive, if you wish. So a compromise between liberal tradition, conservative, and fully fledged liberal society. Technology is really an attempt to balance the efficiency with the social objective, and it varies a lot across sectors. From the legal point of view, social governance approach with rules and regulations that reflect that, and from the environmental point of view, the keyword here is restore, not quite integrate and recognize its integral role in everyday life, but certainly the need to go beyond protecting and restoring such. So this is a very, very schematic description of the 4 scenarios, which are described in much more detailed way in the various documentation of the project, which you can find on the website. And that was short, but I will stop this part of the presentation here. So before we give the floor to Danny for the vision, Andrea, you might want again to have some comments here.
Yes, I have a number of questions, but I would like to invite Alain Lostis that have told me that he has a question he would like to comment, he would like to share with all of us. Maybe, Alain, I can ask you to show up and make the comment question to Andrea.
Hello, everyone. I wish I could show up, but the Zoom tells me that the host has stopped my video.
Oh,
So it will be only my voice. No, I was just wondering because the actuality is so hot, and we were advanced enough when we designed the scenarios. Thanks, host. When we designed the scenarios, we were aware of this issue of strengths in power, of the hard power, the rigid, the hard governance scenario. And I was only wondering if the most recent event in the actuality, and especially the long-term consequence of the war in Ukraine on energy and on sovereignty, so possibly a movement where Europe will want to develop some more autonomy. Do these most recent trends, do they fit? Do they oppose? Do they are they covered?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there are more recent trends that I don't perceive, but it was maybe a question of are we still in connection with the most recent developments, international developments especially?
Thank you, Alain. That's a tough one because clearly, I mean, actually, you would see when we present the vision that, and maybe when we put a couple of open issues on the table at the end of this session, that we are fully aware of this. I think the beauty of Foresight is precisely that it, especially if we manage to keep it alive in time, is precisely to be able to envisage futures that may be extremely improbable, extremely unlikely. You know everything, of course, about so-called black swans or wild cards, whatever you want to call them, things that have a very low probability but a high impact whenever they happen. And this is something which is to some extent reflected in the narrative about scenarios. But clearly, when these scenarios were built up, we didn't have a war in Ukraine. We did not, and even if I mean, somewhere in the long list of weak signals, you can find the geopolitical disruptions as a possible options. But by definition, a wildcard is extremely difficult to incorporate in a comprehensive narrative of a given scenario. I think those of us who have experience in building scenarios know that maybe this issue of the wildcard, which is very often underestimated. Why? Well, primarily because when it comes to quantifying it, it's next to impossible, because very often what people tend to do is to try to translate scenarios into modeling. Say, okay, if you do all these things, then we will have all these figures, all these numbers, growth, etc., etc. When you have a wild card, this is practically impossible. So it tends to be swept under the carpet. It is present in the list of concerns. It is somehow included qualitatively in a broader narrative of scenarios, But when it comes to actually imagining what the actual consequence can be, I know of very little, to say none, of foresight scenarios which have been able to do so. So I think the only thing we can do is to, let's say, update and to keep this debate alive. This was one of the purposes of the project, to set up a structure, a framework for discussion, and as we go, try to be able to accommodate things that you know, the unknowns, because that's what we're talking about. So the known unknowns are easy, but the unknown unknowns are very difficult. I realize I haven't answered scientifically to your question, but that's all I can do, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Andrea. When I was listening both of you, I was thinking, this is just my intuition, that this Ukraine case in my mind is kind of moving us from the myth of speed, which is the modernity, let's say, ideal, to somewhere close to the myth of strength, which is maybe something that we see now happening all around. So, but anyway, I don't want to oversimplify these issues. I don't want to oversimplify.
Actually, I think that there are at least two fairly obvious potential impacts of what is happening in Europe now. One is I mean, going back to more conservative and more traditional, more rigid rules of the game, because this is a defensive reaction, and the defense reaction systematically relies on known habits and things that to some extent we're familiar with. That's one thing. The other thing is the risk of, I won't say destruction of the European Union, but certainly of a weakening of the European Union in terms of our politicians have done reasonably well so far, but we are not at the end of the story. And if you see what happens now in Italy, for instance, we are running serious risk of triggering a weakening of cohesion. And this is, it may seem like, you know, very general and above the board issues, but they have an impact on mobility and mobility culture. Obviously, they have. If we go towards a more rigid society with conservative values on one hand, if on the other hand the member states do not agree on the major strategies and choices, like sharing infrastructure, like sharing the benefits of technology, etc., this has a very strong impact on mobility as well. No? Sure.
It seems that this Ukraine wildcard is producing, at least to me, a very pessimistic appraisal of this forest scenario. It seems that we are moving far away from Gaia as a myth. But at this, if we focus on this specific issue, but let's move to the next presentation, maybe Andrea with Daniel.
Yes, I will give the floor, the screen also to Daniel, because he will share the next slide directly from his own computer.
Okay, and maybe I will love, I'm sure all of you as well, if we continue this discussion with all of you at the end of the presentation of Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Andreu. Thank you, Andrea, also for the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a little screen here that is bothering me. Sorry about that. Okay, now. Good afternoon, everyone. I am taking the relay at this point to describe the research and consultation activities carried out in the last phase of the scenario building process of Rebalance and the results achieved. I will present the vision emerging from the whole forward-looking exercise to shape the future of European transport, better reflecting, as was said before, the inner values and beliefs of Europeans, considering also the environmental boundaries of the planet and the well-being of the people. Okay. So building upon the outcome of the previous steps, which led to the generation of 4 scenarios for future mobility culture at 2050, presented by Andrea before, Rebalance organized a restricted workshop to help into the pathway. Sorry, I'm hearing.
J'ai pas le temps pour les blagues, je les ferai plus tard. Est-ce que Jacqueline est...
Okay, it's fine now. Thank
That's
you.
lovely.
Still some noises in the background. I think it's fine. Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, we organized a restricted workshop to help into the pathway of devising a vision, aimed at the identification and more in-depth characterization of the alternative narrative that better combines 1, the most desirable features in terms of long-term sustainability, with 2, the most faithful reflection of the profound societal values, needs and aspirations and of their possible future dynamics. We also conducted an online survey directed to a wider group of experts and representatives from the civil society in order to gather the feedback of a wider range of stakeholders and also to serve as a basis for the validation of the vision. The participants were asked about their preferred feature of several mobility aspects, as you see here on the table. And in order to avoid undue influence towards any scenario, the possible choices were listed in alphabetical order. That's a methodological curiosity, without any reference to the scenario to which they belong. We present here in this table the results associated with the 4 scenarios. In the first line, we have included a keyword for every scenario, which roughly describe its main characteristic. For example, it would be growth for Hercules, equity for Themis, well-being for Gaia, and efficiency for Hermes. Would be a kind of leitmotif for each scenario. And then the first question was about the future mobility in an ideal world, and the result was that it must be essentially sustainable. The challenge, of course, is to achieve sustainability simultaneously with other aspects. For instance, accessibility, that should be the first priority of the future mobility system. We also see that reliable services are the best mobility response to our future needs and aspirations. Then the fundamental driver to achieve mobility service quality is considered low environmental impact. In this case, the votes of the under 40 gave priority to the environmental approach over other factors. It was quite noticeable. To the question, how much do we need to move? There's an overwhelming majority that chooses mobility decoupled from growth. We move differently. Mobility has also a social dimension. So the question is, will we move alone or together? The respondents doubtfully say communitarian mobility. That is focused on the needs of specific communities, be it geographically or functionally defined. Is the trade-off between cost and quality of service inevitable? Is price differentiation the solution? Well, the preferred one in this case is different prices for different purposes. With the massive advent of artificial intelligence and other ICT-based solutions, is there a threat to our privacy? In this case, there is a slim majority that opts out in this case. Then there's a general outside the project. There's a general common opinion on the need to reduce the prevalence of private car use, especially in the urban context. And inside the project, a smart multimodal mobility was the chosen level. I have to say that there was no clear consensus on this. The responses were quite scattered, so no clear majority. About the importance of the truthfulness of prices, is there an inevitable trade-off between fairness and efficiency? The majority says that we should get market prices right by internalizing all social and environmental impacts. Regarding freedom of movement, which is an incontrovertible right of European citizens, is it sensible and even feasible to to temperate it, to moderate it in the name of to modulate it in for the sake of sustainability and well-being. Well, more than a half of the responses want to keep it like it is now, and to have free mobility from and to everywhere. Tricky question now. How should we modulate people's mobility choices and behaviors to achieve an ideal mobility of the future? Here we had a total discrepancy between generations. Nudge behaviors give way to reflecting emergency of new values as we look at the younger population, and this was the preferred choice among people under 40. The last question regarding the role of technology, we have also hinted that in one of the questions before, and which would be the best way to introduce and promote advanced technology-based mobility solutions. Here, there's an agreement on the option of human-centered technology that serves the interests of local communities. Okay, you see now here the pathway that links the top-ranked voting result. It is mostly placed either on Themis or Gaia, with a couple of exceptions. And accordingly, and following the people's preferences, the vision would derive from a combination of the two soft power scenarios, which are Themis and Gaia, with a slight inclination towards the latter. We consider that these results reflect a very European scale of values, and the challenge resides in combining all the elements to build an ideal desired vision in a coherent way, which is a coherent narrative. Then, however, reality bites when asking about the likelihood of the scenarios and not the desirability. They consider this the possibility of living in one of the scenarios. And Hermes, the myth of speed, is the winner. This is something that reinforces our initial assumption of the existing disparity between the mobility culture that currently prevails in the world and the emerging social values not yet fully considered in transport policymaking. So for the vision for an alternative mobility culture at 2050 presented here is built on three main pillars. The first one is the scenario framework. The second one was the workshop and the survey, and then the third one is an analysis of the current prevailing mobility, where a critical review of the mainstream mobility culture in Europe has led to the formulation of a series of claims. The claim, as we call it, with a series of claims summarized in this slide. First of all, cultural claims. We are living in a cultural change in mobility. Modernity is a double-edged sword. Speed and efficiency are unfairly worshipped. Technology has a dark side in the forms of place detachment and time alienation. We are experiencing this chronicity in our lives. The downside of freedom of movement is cultural standardization. Mobility injustice keep on growing. Newton's third law of motion applies to rights, or more precisely to the fear of losing them and political reactions. COVID-19, the pandemic, altered many of our reality schemes. And then the concept of tempo giusto, not too soon, not too late, not too fast, and not too slow, just tempo giusto. And then we have a set of political claims that, which include the political imagination, sensitive political decisions, ethics and economics. I would love to see that. Disruptive technologies, and at last we identify a weak but nonetheless broad consensus for a paradigm shift in Europe. So the vision presented at this point has been devised to first address the rebalance claims, then second to characterize the ideal mobility culture that would allow for the materialization of the advocated transition, and then finally to represent this transition in the rebalance scenario framework. The vision for rebalancing mobility culture by 2050 is structured into two different levels. The first level is based on 5 main cornerstones, which support the overarching objective of imagining a new transport paradigm that reclaims the proper place of culture in the policy making process. The first cornerstone is cultural change. We are witnessing a cultural change in mobility in Europe. Not only it is a new trend, it is a major change in what mobility is and how time is experienced. Many social movements are part of this cultural change and are likely to keep growing. The second cornerstone is modernity and mobility. This double-edged relationship means that expanding opportunities, creativity, and freedom are accompanied very often by growing constraints. Here we have an important cultural shift. Constrained mobility is increasingly seen as a burden, just as it's also seen as a burden in infinite productivity and efficiency, and also we have more awareness on the dark side of mobility, and it is under greater attention. Then we have criticism of speed and efficiency. This critique of speed, fluidity, which are the paramount values of modernity. These values need to be surpassed, and taking into account that questioning speed does not entail that future policies must consistently aim at slowing down any movement. It is rather intended to shed light on the marginal value of increasing the speed of physical movement, which is as I said, is marginal, and on the need to reconsider on the other hand the social value of other aspects as reliability, safety, conviviality, and public health. Then we have that technology that prevents place detachment and time alienation. Sorry, the development of the technological sphere around individuals contributes to detach them from their environment, from places, or from other people. As physical distances are subverted, and the connection to networks often matters more for interaction than that spatial distance. However, one can envision a world of fluid, flexible spatial alliances and new kinds of organization for production and distribution, more time and space responsive forms of decision making that incorporate all these new aspects. And the fifth cornerstone is mobility justice, because it is likely that society will become divided by those able to control their time and mobility, the so-called kinetic elite, and those unable to do so. There's a difference between those always attached to standardized schedules and those who are totally unplugged. Mobility injustices will spontaneously tend to grow or continue to grow if we do not react. Then the second level of the vision consists of a set of secondary values and desires that depend on the aforementioned 5 cornerstones, and how this may provide direction into policies and measures. The elements of this level help devise the mobility turn, as we call it, to generate this long-term cultural change in the way we understand mobility. I will not go through all of them. I will highlight some of them instead. For instance, people-centered mobility policies, which should emphasize values such as well-being and equity. Be more sensitive to human needs and wishes, and reflect the cultural change that we are talking about all the time. Then we have the social value and political relevance of public health benefits due to active mobility, which may overpass the costs of more time spent traveling and make the most of the relationship between modernity and mobility, thanks to active mobility. Then mobility services, we think that they do not have to be planned to save time as much as possible and moving people from points to another at the minimum cost. At least not planning this always like this, because we think that travel time is not wasted time. It can be meaningful travel time. There are many kinds of breaks, recharging, you have interactions, unexpected delays, detours, unexpected also surprises, and these may become meaningful experiences as well, not just saving time and saving expenses. Another point would be new transport technologies that should assure affordability in order to allow all people to move by themselves. That is universal mobility. And emerging technologies will play a crucial role in terms of inclusion and exclusion. And the last point that I would like to highlight is improving hospitality and conviviality on passenger transport systems are important goals, are as important as reliability and efficiency. And transport systems together with public spaces and facilities can provide potential opportunities to people with different cultural origins and backgrounds and incomes and education levels or interests to allow them to be together. And this is let's say a change from individual transport to communitarian mobility. And this finally the last slide to show the transition to the vision. It's a way forward that recaps the concluding steps of the project and aimed at devising a roadmap towards the implementation of the alternative vision. And if we look back at the 4 scenarios, we can clearly see that our current paradigm would be similar in many aspects to Hercules, the red pellet on your screen. If we continue to do nothing in the sense of following the same lines of the past and the present, the future evolution is likely to move closer to Hermes. However, preferences and desires of the participants in our research show a clear determination towards switching to the other side of the power and political axis, and this translates into a vision that is placed halfway through Themis and Gaia, with a slight inclination to the latter, in a context of a more fluid society. And that pretty much sums it all. Thank you for your attention and your patience.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I may ask you to keep the last slide you have presented.
Sure.
Because I think it's quite good as illustration.
Yes,
yeah, this one
okay.
is really, this one I think is, at least in my eyes, is really an excellent synthesis of the abstract concepts we are today talking. I have a question in the chat by Cristina Marolda, which is linking my previous comment, the previous discussion we had on Hercules and Gaia with the Ukraine question by Alain. I don't know, Cristina, if you can ask the question by yourself, or do you prefer me to read it? I would prefer you to.
I think I can.
Great, perfect, thank you.
All right. Yes, no, I was okay.
She had disappeared.
You are muted, Christina.
Sorry, I allowed my speech. So I was going on Alain comment at the beginning that in fact this new presence that we are facing today is quite different from the ones we had during our conversations. And I think that the scenario that we would see as more probable to happen are changing, because I think that at that time we couldn't count on the fear that people has for the future. It's not only due to the war, the Ukrainian-Russia war, but it's also the very rapid acceleration of environmental issues. And I think that people now are really completely lost in a vision in what could happen tomorrow. And a strong leader is maybe the one that people need now. So the probability to stay in Hercules is maybe much higher today than a few months ago. That was just my comment. And things are changing so rapidly and so quickly that it's very difficult to give any answer today.
Thank you, Christina, because I was thinking exactly the same that you are thinking right now. So let me further extend your comment with my own comment, because I have the feeling that fear is also related to the need for survival. So health is a paramount value we have. We want to survive. So we are able to give up our freedom of choice to increase our welfare in these terms. So maybe the mobility is going to have safety and security as paramount values. So maybe we don't care much if we are surveyed and the system knows where we are. If we are safe, we feel secure. So maybe the autonomous vehicles are going to be popular and well accepted because they provide much safety to everybody. So I do really agree with you that fear, which in also for environmental things is reinforced with the idea of global warming. So it seems that as you said, Hercules and the myth of strength is going to be reinforced. So what do you think? Daniel and Andrea, are Christina and me over pessimistic at this point?
Yeah, regarding to answering to that, we could oppose the optimism of the will against the the pessimism of the intellect, as the French Nobel Prize Roland said. Well, fear has always been an element, an ingredient to control the masses or to control people, to put it like that. So I think that it will be cyclic in this case. The use of whatever ingredients of fear you have at hand to try to push your agenda. So. As Andrea said it before, we imagined the scenarios before the last crisis, the war in Ukraine, the energetic crisis. It depends on the impacts, on the duration also of this crisis, and what will be the long-term effects on the minds of the people. Because if we can all remember that we thought at the first stages of the pandemic that things were going to be totally different, that we were witnessing firsthand change in the mentality of the people regarding many aspects, that it would be also a total, we would come out of the pandemic with a new reality and with new approaches. And we can say, we can guess now, we can fairly say that it has not been the case, that people were willing with all their inner strength and desires to come back to the previous situation. So maybe it could be the case for the last crisis. People would love to continue with their previous lives, and also pushing or trying to make visible their desires and their values, not yet fully considered, as we say in the project. But who knows?
Yeah, if I thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Christina and Andrea, for the question. I fully agree with what Danny said, but I think there's a fundamental remark to be made here, is that it's about the time scale, because cultural changes take a long time, a generation maybe. it has to go through education process, through heavy engagement and participation. These are things, I mean, any cultural change will take decades. This is, I think, well known and difficult to counterbalance. Maybe in the future, if you manage to have a society where deliberation bottom up is more of the essence, then this time scale can be slightly shortened, but still changing cultural and deeply rooted cultural values will take time. What we are looking at now are shocks into a path. And these shocks, indeed, in the short term for sure, and maybe even in the slightly longer term, somehow slow down whatever cultural change, even the more virtuous cultural change pathway that can be put in place. So, if we look at this slide, for instance, Danny started by saying that we are now following the red to yellow arrow. Indeed, maybe the shock that we are absorbing now makes this transition from red to yellow even slower and even more let's say bumpy. I think the interest of this long-term foresight exercise is try to devise policies, means, and strategies that can be effective in the medium to long term, although through a possibly bumpy road. But indeed, we have to believe in it, because if we want to enforce cultural changes through, again, education, social changes, etc., we need some kind of a consistency over time of determination. If that's why I'm talking about time scale, because it is obvious that in the short term we will observe things that appear to be witnessing a regression. Our effort, I think, the effort of our politicians, if they believe in the fact that in the long term we can do better, is to stick to the long-term determination and put policies into place that can absorb these bumps. I mean, I remember a seminal study that was done by the European Commission after the 2008 crisis, and the scenario which was finally selected as the most likely was a so-called the lost decade. I don't know if you remember this study. It was a study done by demographers, I think, more than by finance people, and they agreed on the fact that the most likely scenario of recovery was a scenario where we would have lost a decade. Losing a decade doesn't mean that you have to abandon the pathway. It means that it is indeed slowed down because there have been shocks that have slowed it down. I'm trying to be optimistic, Christina. I know that you might not share this, but I'm trying to be optimistic and put some faith in the fact that we can convince politicians that they have to look in the long term.
That is exactly my question, Andrea, because I mean, unfortunately, because of this shock, we are witnessing a change in the leadership. So what will these new leaders will? And that is what.
Yeah, but you see, Liz Truss has already gone, huh? So let's hope that she will be followed by others soon.
Thank you. There is any further question from people attending, colleagues attending the meeting? Otherwise, I will ask you my favorite question to Andrea and Daniel. Where do you locate the, let's say, the mainstream European transport policies in this picture? So the core of the projects, the philosophy, the ideology, let's say, the substance of the essence, if you prefer, of the European policies, where they are located, what kind of combination of these scenarios, to what kind of combination they belong?
I think maybe I mean, this is certainly at the core of the discussion that we will have next Thursday. I anticipate, because this is about how this translates indeed both in the present and in the future into policy. I must say that it's a mixed feeling, because there is certainly an increased attention from the point of view of the Commission at various levels towards the values that are enshrined in our scenario B and C. My slight concern is that I want to understand if this goes beyond the lip service, you know, if this is something which can really translate into major changes. Because, for instance, I have to, let me give you a personal example in which I do mea culpa. I've been working for years with and for the Commission on the issue of internalization of external costs. This was, you know, the green paper, white paper, fair and efficient pricing, and blah blah. And this was clearly something which seems to be the solution to devising both infrastructure and ways of using the infrastructure that would be fair, that would ensure equalities, etc. I think this has been useful, but I think we now see the limits of this. The limits are precisely the fact, and I hope that our project can contribute to illuminate that, that there are a number of values and cultural tenets which cannot be addressed by internalization of external costs, at least not in the current state of knowledge. So I'm not sure that, I think the Commission, again, is full of good intentions and has the right buzzwords when it comes to devising policies. Maybe it's a bit slow in recognizing the limits of some of the past experiences in policy making. But Cristina, you are the veteran here, so maybe you have, now that you're not anymore part of the Commission, you've always been,
Can speak freely.
you've always been speaking your mind even when you were at the Commission, but even more so now. Maybe you can comment on this.
Well, the Commission is extremely slow as any big organization, and there is a lot of inertia and even the policy work of the Commission. So for the moment, I wouldn't count so much on the Commission intervention to change things in the world for the moment.
Yeah. So we agree.
I can say that now.
Well, like I said, you didn't mince your word even when you were at the Commission, so I agree.
Okay, thank you very much. Still, we have a few minutes before 5:30. That was our ending of this session. So there is some further questions from members of this webinar participants.
Well, I have one question that I'd like to put on the table, but it's difficult to answer in 5 minutes. You know, when you come up with scenarios, you want them to be sufficiently contrasted to open the eyes of everybody on the fact that there are alternatives, and these alternatives only emerge if you build visions that are sufficiently different from one another. But another important characterization of scenarios or of visions is that it has to be somehow internally consistent, that there shouldn't be obvious internal contradictions between what the narrative of the scenario proposes. So I think that as far as the 4 scenarios we came up with, this internal consistency is pretty good. I mean, we've worked on it, we've discussed it. I think I wonder whether we could reopen the question of internal consistency for what concerns this, the vision, which being somehow a mix between 2 of these scenarios is trying to take the best of 2 different worlds And when you try to take the best of two different worlds, you might enter into some bad surprise in terms of it's just not feasible. So I do not have an answer to that, but I think we should somehow give a further look to the internal consistency of the vision as we have defined it so far, and this should be somehow reflected in the manifesto, because otherwise we run the risk of sending out messages which are perceived as wishful thinking, and this is not good, because it loses credibility. I remember that in one of our very numerous participatory events, I don't remember which one, but there was, I think I can quote him, it was Chris Nash, whom some of you might know, and when we were discussing about likelihood of future dynamics, and even more when we were discussing about desirability, he was very clear about the fact that indeed it would be good if everybody agreed on the fact that we need to change values and to do something about it. Could even already be a second best if we manage to adopt the nudging option, even without changing values across the board, at least nudging people to. But his claim is, unless you have some, some sticks and not only carrots, you will never achieve this. This is an example, but I wonder whether our vision and maybe our manifesto should consider the fact that if we paint a picture of the ideal vision which is not sufficiently realistic, it might be counterproductive.
Well, this is a deep philosophical question, Andrea. If we have to forget about the idea of utopia, and we have to be just pragmatist, or still the idea of utopia is still working, and just the problem is to have a feasible roadmap for the coming 10 years, but always to have an ideal long-term vision could be interesting, even if it's not achievable in 10, 15 years. But this is the work of the roadmap to see how much. But
I think it's feasible to reconcile some utopian level of thinking with some practicalities. I reread recently a fantastic quotation. I might have already shared it with some of you, because when I like something, I tend to be repeating, from this Uruguayan philosopher who died only a few years ago, Eduardo Galeano. And there was this fantastic talk about utopia, precisely, and he was asked, okay, but what is a che serve? What is the usefulness of utopia? And he, of course, he elaborated a number of things, but the end of the discussion was, utopia sirve para caminar. The utopia is useful because it allows you to walk on. Then it gets, the more you walk, the more the utopia also goes further, so you have to run after it, but at least you move on. Okay, so I think this is the right spirit.
Yes. Alain, I don't know if you seems to be just about to intervene. I see you changing your face, your position. I don't know if you are traveling. You are at home.
No, I was simply listening, and I need to activate my mic so that I can hear voices. I don't know why. It's an issue. But just to comment that I appreciate that you make some teasing for the next session on the roadmap.
Yes, exactly. Kind of advertisement, yes, kind of introduction for the next session. So I don't know if Andrea, may you close the session with
it's just to say goodbye, because I think we've had a hopefully interesting presentation and discussion. It's also for us, and these are also for us not only opportunities to hopefully share things with the people who are external to the project, but I think it's a good opportunity for us within the consortium also to somehow take stock in a structured way of where we are and what is left to be done. So I think from this point of view, it is certainly something which I believe useful. I hope it can then percolate down into the manifesto, as Andreu, you are the main actor there, so I'm sure you will take the most of this. As usual, I can only conclude by saying that if you have further thoughts, please, just even unstructured thoughts, even, you know, ideas, bullet points, keywords, and you want to share them with us after this talk, please, you're encouraged to do so, as you are also warmly encouraged to be with us again on the next two and final events. So one is next Thursday, same time, discussing the third step of our process, so the how to go from the vision to action and to policy first. And then the 22nd of November, the final conference, which will be kind of, you know, celebrative event. We will present the manifesto and hopefully we will be able to somehow trigger and launch a wider campaign for its diffusion. So thanks to everybody. Thanks, Andrea, for moderating this. Thanks, Danny, and thanks all those of you who have joined in comments.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Ciao, ciao.